Urgent. The Iranian regime has once again challenged the United States with a blackmail tactic in the Strait of Hormuz after signaling openness and then backing down once again. This Saturday, April 18th, 2026, Iran tightened its control over the passage again. There were reports of shots fired at commercial vessels. The Iranian regime wants to force concessions from the United States, but this blackmail is producing exactly the opposite effect. A devastating response from the powerful United States Armed Forces, which has already warned before about the possible return of devastating bombings on Iran. If the terrorist regime of the Revolutionary Guard lied, they would sabotage even the end of the ceasefire that ends on Wednesday. The United States has even mentioned launching a ground invasion on Kharg Island, and now a much tougher new escalation is definitely on the radar. Who is at the center of it? The Iranian side, with alleged involvement of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. And on the other side are the United States, which already maintains a blockade against Iranian ports. How did this happen? After a brief reopening announced on Friday, Tehran tightened control again on Saturday, ordered vessels to turn back, and made it clear that it uses the route as a pressure tactic. In practice, there was a retreat followed by a new threat, and this reinforces the image of a regime that wavers, bluffs, and pushes the region into more chaos. The reason for this new escalation is also clear. Iran is trying to respond to the blockade imposed by Washington and is trying to turn Hormuz into a tool of political and economic blackmail. But this move hits not only other nations hard but also the Iranian population itself. When the regime closes a vital route, fires at ships, and sows fear across maritime shipping, it does not demonstrate stable strength. It demonstrates desperation, improvisation, and a suicidal logic of power that sacrifices trade, supply, and the future to maintain an increasingly costly confrontation. The United States' response is already underway and may become even tougher. The American blockade began on Monday, April 13th, and according to Reuters, it involves more than 10,000 troops, over a dozen warships, and dozens of aircraft. This Saturday, the American military said that 23 vessels have already obeyed orders to turn back toward Iran. Before that, an American destroyer had already intercepted oil tankers that were trying to leave an Iranian port. This shows that Washington is not just talking, it's tightening the net at sea and testing how far the Iranian regime will insist on this path of confrontation. And here comes the most explosive point: Kharg Island. This island is a central point for the Iranian oil infrastructure and has already been targeted by American bombings against military installations in March. At the time, Donald Trump said he spared the oil infrastructure, but warned that he could reconsider this decision if Iran interfered again with the free passage of ships. In other words, Kharg has already been on the map of American military pressure and now returns to the American spotlight. If Tehran insists on attacking vessels and closing Hormuz again, the risk increases that the United States will strike this target with much more force. The discussion about an even greater escalation is also growing. What already exists is serious. Naval blockade, interception of vessels, preparation to board ships linked to Iran in international waters, according to the Wall Street Journal report cited by Reuters. And renewed threats against strategic points of the regime. This doesn't prove that American troops will land on Iranian soil tomorrow, but it raises that possibility. At least in limited operations focused on key targets, within a more realistic scenario than before. The conflict has escalated. The effect of this crisis is devastating. Hundreds of ships have been stranded in the region since the beginning of the conflict. Gulf exporters have reduced production, and uncertainty has once again affected energy, shipping, and supply chains. About 20% of the world's oil depends on this passage. When Iran closes Hormuz again and attacks ships, it doesn't just target its rivals, it affects the finances, security, and stability of several nations. And once again, it makes the Iranian population pay a brutal price. Because each new provocation increases isolation, raises economic pressure, and makes further bombings more likely. In the end, what you see is a suicidal regime pushing its own people into the abyss. Iran tries to blackmail the United States, lies about openness, backs down, closes Hormuz again, and fires its ships. As if it could play with one of the most important routes on the planet without provoking an overwhelming reaction. But that bill comes due, and it's a heavy one. Kharg has been attacked before by the United States, is already part of the war, and could become a target again in an even harsher offensive if Tehran insists on this reckless escalation. And what's more, when we talk today about a new phase of the conflict, whether it's a limited ground action or a deeper operation, it no longer sounds like a distant possibility, but rather a real risk within a scenario that the regime itself helped to create. By turning Hormuz into an instrument of bluff and destruction, the Iranian dictatorship doesn't just target its rivals. It devastates the Iranian population, isolates the nation, and opens the door to an even greater military clash, which may arise precisely from the regime's obsession with challenging a much greater power.